Okay, this is chapter 9, part 3. Let us pick up talking about when you actually conduct one of these structured interviews, how you want to prepare for that, how you want to approach that in the most professional way. First of all, you see this point number 1 here of knowing your way around the schedule, meaning the schedule is just a fancy word for your list of questions that you're going to follow in order. It's kind of a script that you go through and, take the questions one at a time. So maybe the first question might be, your gender, male or female, your age, basic demographic, things like that. And then you go through the entire list with all the questions. So if you're well prepared and you know all the questions inside and out and the order of the questions and the answers that are possible, well, you're going to come off professionally, you're going to come off really competent, and that's going to give confidence to the interviewee and help the process go smoothly. So a few things you want to do in the beginning is you want to introduce the research, and you want to have some sort of rationale for the research. So a lot of times if you're contacting somebody over the phone, say, they're going to think you're selling something, that it's some sort of persuasive conversation to try to get you to buy something. Well, this is research, and the purpose of research is gaining knowledge, gaining data and information in a valid way. And so you want to let folks know that the purpose of what you're doing. So if you're working for a university, sponsored by a university, conducting some survey, you want to say, for example, I'm from Idaho State University. We're conducting some scientific research where we want to learn more about about crime and violence or something, as an example. And so let the folks know right up front that you're not trying to sell anything, that it's scientific research, and that you're looking for volunteers who have a few minutes to spare to give answers that can help study this topic. So your rationale, your justification is why is this important? This is a serious problem. If you're talking about violence, we've got way too much of it in society, and we're trying to come up with solutions. So if you can sort of appeal to the volunteer's sense of trying to help out and make a little, voluntary time commitment to try to make things better, that you're going to be more likely to be successful with somebody if they think that they're helping out and it's just not you making money on something or something like that, that they and the community get something out of it. So you want to identify yourself, your employer, who's running the show, who are you a part of, the purposes of the research and the procedure of the interview. So you want to tell them quickly that, this will just take 10 minutes and we're just going to do some background questions and try to give them a sense of what they're getting into, because this is supposed to be strictly voluntary, and so you don't want to deceive them at all. You want to be perfectly honest about the whole thing. And so speaking of that, on the ethical issues, you want to make sure to let them know, to reassure them, any good study is going to keep the answers completely confidential and anonymous. You need to let folks know that you don't want to know names, you're not going to record names, you're not going to record personal information that can connect answers with that individual, and that you folks are very serious about preserving anonymity and confidentiality so that people will feel confident giving answers to sensitive questions. And also to let them know right up front that this interview is completely voluntary. Of course, you don't have to do it. And if you become uncomfortable at some point in the middle of the interview, that you certainly could withdraw from it. There's no pressure. It's totally a choice. You let them know that we really appreciate their time and helping out, but it never should be something based on pressure, like, you have to do this, or once you start this, you have to finish, that kind of thing. And also you want to give an opportunity for the interviewee to ask any questions. You definitely want to be open to answer their questions so they don't have any concerns and they feel good about the whole thing and they know what's going on, understand what's going on. So a little more on conducting the structured interviews is that you want to build rapport. And rapport it just means a good relationship with the person that you're speaking with. Now, you're only going to be talking to them for a few minutes, so this would need to be something that would need to be developed quickly. But if you're a polite, professional person, friendly, and you make the person feel comfortable, if you have skills that way, if you're trained properly, then you should be able to, develop a good feeling between you and the interviewee, so that they will be more comfortable, more willing to help you out and participate, and feel comfortable to give honest, accurate, complete answers as you move through that schedule. Now, when you're asking the actual questions, you're supposed to keep straight to the schedule. Even small variations in wording can affect answers. So it's that theme that we stressed before. The whole approach with this structured interviewing is uniformity. We want the data to reflect the person's feelings, the person's understanding, knowledge, information, not yours, we don't want to influence people to give the answers that we want, or we don't want them to give answers that they think we're looking for. It needs to be all about them. And so we've got to stick to the script. And hopefully the script has been written in a way which is neutral, which is non-judgmental, which is encouraging accurate answers. Recording answers, write the exact words. If, we've talked about how most of these answers are sort of multiple choice, and that you just indicate A, B, C, or D, so you don't have to write anything. But sometimes there's the occasional fill in the blank sort of question, like on a test. You might have a short answer or fill in the blank question, which later could get coded, translated into a number, a category of some sort. So if there are situations where you need to write down the words that they say, it needs to be their exact wording, word for word. So again, it's all about precision and accuracy. But most often we do use these fixed choice questions, meaning, so how do you feel about the death penalty? Strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. And they're forced to answer one of those questions. And so the philosophy, the rationale behind that is precision. Again, getting a specific answer that you can give a number to and then analyze it quantitatively. So that's what they mean by fixed choice. That's what we usually use in these interviews, because that tends to be the quantitative approach. You also want to give clear instructions. That's why you have a well-prepared script beforehand, is so that you don't have to come up with clear instructions. It's already laid out there for you and prepared carefully beforehand, so you just need to stick to the script, and it should be clear. Some questions are not relevant to every every interviewee. So there's certain questions that, say, for example, how long have you been married? Well, that's a question that only applies to people who are married. People who are single, that doesn't apply to them. So sometimes you have screening questions, filter questions, that where if you ask, so what's your marital status? Are you married? Yes. Okay, well, we want to ask you about your marriage. Here's some follow-up questions. If they're not married, if they're single, then you'll skip all those questions and move on to the next thing. So you need to have all this laid out and organized, and the interviewer needs to know all that so they don't get confused and ask questions that don't belong, aren't pertinent to that person. Question order. Every interviewee must get questions in the same order. Again, it's all about uniformity. You usually want to ask the general demographic questions first. So it just warms up the interviewee if you ask the kind of stuff that's always asked on questionnaires, on forms, name, gender, age, job, employment, that kind of stuff. It's just kind of basic stuff. You want to start out with that, because that's just kind of more neutral, and you get people comfortable with the whole process of answering questions. It just seems natural to ask those kind of up front. The only ones you have to be maybe a little bit careful with is some of them could be a little bit sensitive, like age. Some people don't like to give their age. So, you have to weigh that a little bit and decide if you want to ask that later on. But usually if you wanted to ask the more sensitive ones, you maybe put those at the end of your demographic basic questions. Because again, if you get people, if they answer a few easy questions up front, then they get a little more comfortable and might be willing to do the sensitive ones a little bit further down the list. So everybody gets the same order. General before specific. Earlier questions may affect the salience of later ones. So that's just, again, you have to use logic when you're putting your questions together. That may make sense to ask certain things first. There's really no way to give you folks complete guidance on this beforehand, before you ever did a survey. But you have to think it through. Is it best to ask this sooner or later? First question should be directly related to the topic. So if you introduce and you say that this study, we're interested in learning more about the family, well, it kind of makes sense to ask these questions pretty close to the top. So it seems like you're asking what you said you were going to be asking about, right? So it doesn't seem like you're wandering off and doing something completely different than you said you were going to do. But again, you do want, if the questions are sensitive, difficult, it is good to tend to put those toward the end, or at least somewhere in the middle once people have gotten more comfortable, because it's hard to answer sensitive things, especially to a person face to face or even over the phone. It's easier for sensitive questions. It's easier to use these automated robo-type calls, the computer-assisted calls, because people are going to tend to be more comfortable answering delicate, sensitive questions to a machine, to a computer who doesn't care, right, than a human being on the other end of the phone. So sensitive, put those towards the end, and you want to ask them very carefully. And again, not judgmentally. You want to be nice and open and non-judgmental, so you come across like you don't care what they answer, even though it's a really difficult, maybe awful behavior that you're asking about. You need to ask like you're professional and you're indifferent one way or the other, so that they'll feel comfortable and they feel like they won't get judged when you ask those questions. Now, two terms you should be familiar with: probing versus prompting. So when a respondent does not understand a question or gives an insufficient answer, then you want to do a little non-directive probe, like you might say something like, can you say a little bit more about that? Or, something that will kind of, probe means to question a little further, to go a little deeper because they didn't give a full answer, or maybe they're hesitating a little bit. So it's a little encouragement, it's a little nudge. Think of it as like a nudge. And you see that option there of repeat fixed choice alternative. So if they're hesitating, kind of not giving the answer, you can say, well, let me give you those answers again. Strongly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. Where do you think you would fall? Which category do you think you'd fall into? So you kind of repeat the question, repeat the answers again, try to encourage them. So, because your goal is of course in a voluntary way to get them to give you an answer. If they do not give you an answer, if they say don't know, not going to answer, I don't really want to answer that one, in a sense you've sort of failed as an interviewer, because what you call that is a situation where you end up with missing values, missing data. And when you have missing data, when you go analyze that data, that person ends up getting dropped out of your sample, and they don't get counted in your survey. They don't get included because they didn't give a valid answer. So that's a problem. Whenever you don't get a valid answer, you lose that person in a statistical sense. And so, that's a negative. And so you want to try to get, if you can, again, in a professional, voluntary sort of way, you want to get people to give an answer, a valid answer, an accurate answer. So you want to be skilled in trying to be able to do that. Prompting, on the other hand, would be the interviewer suggests possible answers, or you should sometimes to get around the sensitivity issue, instead of making the interviewee say something. If it's a face-to-face interview, we're sitting across the table from each other, I might want to pass a card to you that has answers on it, so you don't actually even have to say the answer. If it's kind of sensitive, you could just point to it, or you could just mark a box or something like that. So, because sometimes people might be willing to tell you, if they don't have to say it out loud, it might sound embarrassing, it may make people uncomfortable. So sometimes they'll use cards to prompt an answer, or they might say, well, there's this, and this answer. So, which one of these would you do you think maybe it's you agree? It seems like maybe you agree on that one. See, so these two are very closely related things, probing versus prompting. Probing is more of a question. Probe means to ask further. Prompting means to kind of suggest, to lead a little bit. You got to be careful about leading because you don't want to put words in people's mouths and get them to say something that's not really their answer, it's yours. So you got to be careful about the prompting thing. But it never hurts to probe and ask, kind of follow-up questions or try to get a little bit more out of them if they're not giving you enough for a full answer. Now, leaving the interview, to finish it up, you always want to show gratitude and thank people. Thank you for your time. You didn't have to do this. This is really a big help. This is going to help us with our scientific research. Hopefully, we're going to come up with some more answers with these serious social problems. We appreciate your time. So you want to be grateful and be sincere about that. Now, this term debriefing, they don't define it here, but you should know this term debriefing. And in case it doesn't come up later, what we mean by debriefing is that you explain to the interviewee what your research is all about. And there's a little bit of ethical question here, but in the beginning of your interview, you may not want to be 100% honest, 100% candid about the purpose of your study. Because a lot of times researchers are worried that if you tell them exactly what you're looking for, that could bias their answers. It could spoil their answers, contaminate their answers if they know what you're looking for. If, on the other hand, they're naive and they're innocent, then they tend to give innocent, naive answers, which might be more honest, more accurate answers. So let me give you an example of this to bring this home, make it more concrete. Let's say that I'm studying violence, and I hypothesize that people who drink too much have a higher risk of acting violently. If I tell the interviewee right up front, that's what I'm looking for. I want to know if there's a connection between drinking too much and a predisposition towards violence. Well, let's say that this is a person who does drink quite a bit, but they don't want to think of themselves as violent, or they don't want to think that the alcohol has a bad effect on them. Maybe they really like drinking. They don't want to have to drink less or give it up or something because it's making them act badly. So if you're looking for something, they may not want to give that to you. It might be true that alcohol makes them tend to behave badly, but maybe they don't want to admit that. They don't want, to kind of confirm your hypothesis because they don't like it. So they might kind of bend their answers a little bit, distort their answers a little bit, and not give you an accurate answer. Because you've the information can kind of, in a sense, contaminate the person's answer. So sometimes it happens quite often in research. They want to keep you naive or you're innocent. You go into it like a blank slate and you just hopefully give straight up accurate answers. But ethically speaking, a lot of times researchers feel like in the end, they need to know what the interviewee needs to know what the research was all about. So you may not say anything up front, but in the end you might say, well, we thank you for all your answers. By the way, just so you know, what we're looking for in this study is to see if there's any connection between abuse of alcohol and violent behavior. So in the end, there's no deception. In the end, there's no lack of candor, lack of honesty. You're letting them know, but you wait till the end so their answers are more innocent, naive. And so debriefing is letting folks know at the end what's anything that you didn't disclose 100% in the beginning. And also that's kind of the main thing, but also usually a part of debriefing too is if you say something like, hey, listen, we ask a few sensitive questions here, some difficult questions. We appreciate your honesty and your ability to talk about these things. Thank you. If bringing up this stuff causes you any trouble, hey, here's some things you might do. Here's my email. Here's the office phone. Give us a call. We can talk through stuff a little bit, or we can see if there's any way we can help. If this is triggered anything negative in you, well, here's some possible solutions. Here's some things that we can do. Here's some things you can do. So it's kind of a little bit of advice, a little bit of making sure everybody's fine at the end of this interview. So that's what they mean by debriefing, is let everybody know exactly what's going on, and if they have any sort of difficulties or anything like that, possible alternative solutions for that. So make sure that you're familiar with that term debriefing, because again, they kind of assume you know what that means right here in these notes. So, of course, what training is very important, and sort of monitoring the quality of the calls, supervision and training is all of that. A lot of this stuff is pretty common sense. You can even have procedures to kind of, monitor the calls and see if people are doing a good job, and if they're making mistakes, then you can follow up and do some training after the fact, a little fine tuning, and you can figure out if your interviewers are doing a good job and you're getting the most accurate, valid answers, and that you're treating the interviewees with respect and dignity that they deserve. And if you have any bad interviewers, then either retraining them, and if they can't get it right, maybe you need to replace them with somebody else. I think just various issues like that. Of course, training, supervision, monitoring are all important to get a quality interviewing process. Now, problems with structured interviews is this first one here is the characteristics. You want to be sensitive to the characteristics of interviewers. Because, for example, if you were asking female interviewees sensitive topics like, for example, experiences of being victimized with sexual assault, you might want to consider in that situation, maybe it'd be better to have a female interviewer. It's possible that your respondents, your interviewees, might be more comfortable if it was a female doing the interviewing. So you want to be sensitive to these issues of who's asking the questions, who's the interviewer, and is there going to be any issues with the characteristics of the interviewer. Another one, just to throw out another example, maybe, for example, like race. If you're asking difficult, sensitive race issues, then maybe the race of the interviewer might make a difference. There could be different levels of comfort depending on the match between the interviewer and the interviewee. So you just want to be sensitive to these kind of issues because again, it's all about truth and getting accuracy and validity in your data, and you want to do whatever it takes to get that. And if you need to consider the characteristics of the interviewer, then consider that. And you may want to use strategies to make sure that you're not injecting bias into the process and the answers, right? And you definitely, one thing you want to try to avoid, you see this term socially desirable, and I've got it underlined lower, social desirability. That there's a tendency when you're talking to a stranger on the phone, and this person is a professional, and they're doing a really good job and asking you all these things that are making you think, there's a tendency, a natural human tendency, to kind of give people answers that they think that the interviewer wants. You want to make yourself look good. When you get interviewed and you're answering questions, it's natural to want to come off well. You don't want to seem like a bad person. And so you may not give accurate answers. Sometimes you may give answers that are socially desirable, that you think the interviewer wants to hear. So that's how coming. You have to, when you're planning these interviews, coming up with schedules, a list of questions and strategies, you want to come up with ways to get the most accurate answers, and you want to be concerned about the social desirability issue. You want to be non-judgmental. You want to make people feel comfortable. You want to stress to people, we're here to get the truth. We absolutely need to have the truth, and it would be better if you didn't say anything than to give us an inaccurate answer. So we need accuracy. So you need to stress to people that they need to be just flatly honest about things, and don't worry about sensitivity and issues, and you're not there to judge or point fingers or any of that. So we can reduce this social desirability problem. So you got to do whatever strategies that you can think of as a professional to try to not get people to answer what they think you want to hear, right? That's social desirability. Make sure you know what that term means. Now, response sets is a little bit more of a general term. That's the tendency for people to answer the same way all the time, whether it's the truth or not. And the social desirability is one type of response set where, okay, I'm always answering in a way that I'm trying to please you. I'm always trying to please you. Doesn't matter what the truth is, I'm trying to please you, so I'm giving the answers I think you're going to like. That's an example of a response set where you're answering the same way all the time, trying to please. Another sort of response set that's real common that you have to worry about when you're putting together these interviews is that I recall back when I used to donate blood a lot and plasma, that they ask a lot of questions about sort of my behaviors because they were worried about getting blood that was, that was like HIV positive blood, or that could be contaminated with other sorts of things. They wanted to get healthy blood. And so they were asking me a long list, 20 questions about, have you done this? Have you done that? All these sort of kind of different sexual behaviors, risky sexual behaviors, traveling to high-risk areas around the world. And it was a long list of questions because they wanted to be really careful and thorough. Well, my answer to all of those questions was no. No, I never did that. No, I never did that. No, I never been there. No, I don't do that kind of stuff. That's, and so no. And so that you could get a response set in that situation, because if I may stop listening and paying attention to what you're actually asking me, and I just might say no, just because I figure that the last 10 times it was no, so the next 10 times it's going to be no too. So I may stop listening and I may give some inaccurate answers. Some of them, the accurate answer might be yes, but I'm not paying attention. So you need to come up with strategies to avoid this kind of thing that's called a response set, where people are not answering the truth, but they're just following a pattern where they just tell you, whatever to get this over with. They're bored, they're not motivated, that kind of thing. So an example of how you'd fix this kind of problem would be to word the questions differently so the answer is not no every time, but that sometimes you're like, oh, well, you worded that kind of the opposite, so actually yes, that kind of thing. So try to mix up the wording of the questions so that encourages the person to pay attention and to give an accurate answer, as opposed to just whatever, let's keep moving kind of a thing, right? So again, you've got to be conscious, you got to think about things carefully and plan strategies to maximize the truth from people. One thing I haven't talked about in this chapter much at all, if I even mentioned it, is a really good thing to do is a pilot study, where you put together your list of questions and then you just get a convenient sample of 10 or 15 or 20 people, maybe people from class. If you're someone who's like me, who's a teacher, you get 10 or 15 people, 20 people to fill out the questionnaire, and then to have those students tell you, were any of the questions bad? Were any of them unclear? Were any of them confusing? And that when you do this it's like a dry run, it's a practice study, a pilot study, you're able to detect problems and you can adjust and come up with different strategies so you don't make those mistakes in the real study, in the big study, the full study. So pilot study is another term that you should know. And it'll come up again later in the semester too, but pilot study is important. Just a couple of terms that don't get defined that should, and then we were also talking about that term debriefing before as well. Don't forget that one is another good one to know. Now let's see. So that's response sets. We want to avoid that kind of a thing. Now there's 2 or 3 more slides that I'm going to have. This video is already getting long, and I think we'll be able to wrap up the chapter right here in terms of lecture notes, because these last couple of slides are important. They're good to know, but they're getting a little bit in the weeds, and we've already covered the basics very thoroughly. So take a look at these last couple of slides on your own, but I'm going to stop it right there, and it's not like we won't have an additional segment or anything. So here we go.